Hello viewers, welcome to my channel.
Today I wanted to share a book that got me started reading a lot of automotive history and taught me about cars from all around the world. The Complete Encyclopedia of the Motor Car, edited by G.N. Giordano. I first looked at this book when I was 10 or 11. The local library had it and my little brother had hauled it out. He didn't really look at it, I did, since he was 6, but I got to know a lot of auto makes from this book that I'm still familiar with today. A lot of the pictures are really familiar, so for me it has a lot of nostalgia. This copy isn't the library book from back then, it's a copy someone gave to me probably 10 years ago. This is a great book that any automotive historian or collector should have. Some of the big names in the car hobby now, like Jay Leno, most certainly have a copy of this on their shelf. It has a listing of supposedly every make of car in the whole world, at least every make of car known of in 1973. From the everyday cars we all know to some real oddballs you've never heard of. So let's take a look inside.
Hi. The Complete Encyclopedia of Motor Cars, 1885 to the present, edited by G.N. Giordano. You can see here that the original date of publication for this book was 1968. And first edition, 1968, reprinted 1969 twice, 1970, 1971. Second edition, 1973, reprinted 1976. 1973 is the present in this book. Everything goes up to that time. So let's take ourselves back in time to 1973 and see how they took a look at automotive history and how they viewed the present day. The first part of it is these, they call them color plates. And this is where the color section of the book. Back in the day, it was actually really expensive to make color photographs. So you only got a limited section of color where everything else would be black and white. I mean, nowadays I know that has long since been done away with. Now everything's color. It's cheap to print books. But on the very first page, you see a really interesting car here. They list each of the models just with a year and the make. It doesn't tell you anything else. So 1897 Leon Bolet, I guess is how that's pronounced, maybe. Here's one that really is quite interesting. 1953 Jowett is what it says, but this is a interesting British car that was built, I believe they built these in Yorkshire, and the company went out of business right about that time because of that car. It was very limited production, and it was a unitary construction, I believe. Back when I saw this, I didn't know anything about it. But you'll notice how they're given a front and rear view of this. I think it's the only car in this color section that gets two pictures dedicated to it. So somebody was pretty interested in it. There's a little tear in that page. Here's another couple of real famous cars. This is the Mini, obviously. It is not labeled Mini. It says 1961 Austin, if you can see that. 1961 Austin is how that's labeled. And below that is a 1959 BMW. Of course, we know that is the 507. Here's a picture I really loved when I was a kid. BMW is at an Italian design built by BMW. When this car here nearly bankrupted them, they saved themselves by building these bubble cars. Another two-page spread with a Volvo. I mean, they could have found a better car to have a two-page spread than a lousy Volvo, but okay. And now we're getting to kind of the present day. So this is one of the few Japanese K cars sold in America, the Honda Z, I believe. I think it says Z right there on the little badge. That's kind of neat. Of course, the infamous Volkswagen 1973. So that was a brand new car at the time this book was printed. There's one last picture here that I definitely want you to see. The 1973 Oldsmobile. It's an Oldsmobile Omega. I didn't notice until just now looking at this. It does give you more information about each of the cars in here. It numbers all of them. So this is number 60. So here you go, number 60, 1973 Oldsmobile Omega Hatchback Coupe. photographed by General Motors Corporation, so it wasn't just some guy taking pictures of somebody's car. It was actually GM commissioned that photo. Not sure if those were really a hatchback though, but maybe they were. And it doesn't show the hatchback, so I can't tell you. Anglo-American terminology. I love that. I get a kick out of that. Um, English. English is a language, by the way. So in English, a bonnet. American, not English, hood. Boot, in American, is trunk. English, capacity of engine, called displacement. Actually, I do use the word displacement personally quite a bit, and I do use hood. I'm an American, obviously, so... Coupe de Ville, town car. Who says Coupe de Ville anywhere anymore? I think everyone just says town car, even the British. Paraffin? Really? Kerosene. Yes, there's some old rednecks that still say two-cycle, but we say two-stroke now, thanks. Windscreen, windshield. Okay, fair enough. I find that section really funny. That's just very amusing that that's there. But here's where it all begins, right? Here's your contributors, and then you start with the letter A, and now you have 500 or 600 pages of automotive history here to look at. So as a 10-year-old, maybe 9, 10, or 11-year-old kid, this was absolutely fascinating. I think the first time I looked through this book, I wasn't so much reading it, because I couldn't really read this as a 10-year-old. This wouldn't make any sense to me. But I sure could look at pictures, right? And I could understand the year. That's all I really got out of it. Okay, so it's a 1960 Abarth. Great, it wasn't really one of my favorite cars necessarily, but there were some real favorites in here, and there's a lot of real old-timers. Probably 80% of all of the photographs in this book, black and white photographs, are of this kind of old nonsense, early 20th century cars. I'm personally not really interested in them very much at all. Not many people are these days. They're slowly going out of existence, or just out of interest. There's fewer and fewer people that really remember riding in these that are alive today. But remember, we're back in time. We're in 1973. So, in 1973, as you look through here, a 1938 Adler, which is a German car, is, how old is that? That's 35-year-old car, maybe? So that's not even that old of a car. A 35-year-old car now is, from the 80s, the late 80s even. So Aero is a make of car from Czechoslovakia. And this is how these are all set up. Depending on how important the make it is, like Adler's fairly important, they get a fairly large amount of text. Some of these are there's literally like, just see another make, or there's just a sentence or two about it. Aero is Czechoslovakia. That's what CS actually is. This is back when, pre-93, obviously, when it was Czech and Slovakia were one country. They were communist at the time, but not necessarily when that car was built. 1929 to 1947, that's when they existed. And underneath the name of the make and the years that they existed is like the official name and where they were made, in this case Prague. A 1937 Aero, and on this second page here, the Aero Minor 615cc saloon. So I believe those had like a DKW type engine layout. I have another picture of one of these in a different book. Very obscure and unusual car. And this is what makes this book really fun to look through, and I've bookmarked several interesting pages here. There's some vehicles in here that you don't see anywhere else, except you see these odd black and white pictures, often with people in the background wearing these like overcoats and stuff. Real old vintage photographs, and everything looks kind of mysterious, like from a different world when everything was black and white. Oh, here's another one of these. Really interesting, and only in this book, Ashley, the Ashley Sportiva. I like the name, and I can tell now, looking at it, having been in a part of London before, that this is certainly a British car, and it's definitely parked. It's somewhere in London, no doubt about it. I wonder if it's a one-off. It says 1958 to 1961. fiberglass body shells and equipment, so they decided to use their fiberglass skills to build a fiberglass bodied car, which doesn't look all that bad actually. 1172cc. I'm guessing this is a Ford Anglia. Yes, it is. So it's, yeah. So they took a boring Ford Anglia 1200 and put a nice body on it to improve it. But you can see the majority of the vehicles in here are these really old, early 20th century types of vehicles. And then the cool stuff, the Bizzarini 5300 GT. I'm going to assume that's 5.3 liter. Yes, it even says that there. 1965 to 1969, Livorno, Italy. If you know your history, you know that Bond cars were named after this guy named Lawrence Bond. His actual name was Bond. They've been gone since like about 1973 or 74. And the current car they were making at the time of the publication of this book, the brand new car, was the Bond Bug. It's become kind of famous now. There's a collector club about these. There was one on Jeremy Clarkson Grand Tour. He converted a Bond Bug into a amphibious car. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, he sort of destroyed it at the same time, but actually it was really cool what he did with what they did with it, using it as an amphibious car to break a on-water speed record. Kind of a well-known car now. Bond a Keep, 1960s, kind of, and then the actual mini car, 197cc, so a little two-stroke engine. I think they had a front engine in those. There's a guy driving it here. Borgward. And there's some really nice pictures here. There's a Borgward Hansa 1951 1500. I think that's what that is. The Rennsport. It's very rare to see a photograph of the Rennsport. I don't think many of those were made. Very famous Isabella Coupe, and the car that put them out of business, the 2.3 liter Borgward, which I believe after Borgward went bankrupt, 1961, that car tried to produce it in Mexico. They failed. They went bankrupt again. But yeah, really pretty nice coverage of Borgward there. They didn't give them much text, I have to say, but they gave them 4 pictures, which is kind of nice. And then you see things that it's kind of odd that they're here, like racing cars. There were a lot of companies that made Formula One cars in the day. This whole book isn't full of these pictures, but for some reason, this make, which I can't really pronounce, has Formula One cars or BT8 sports racing cars, another Formula One car listed. So I'm going to assume that one of the editors was a racing fan. Here's one that really makes looking at a book from the 70s interesting. 1972 Brubaker box. Apparently had, despite the very, very manly looking wheels on that, and that's a very 70s slotted wheel, it had a Volkswagen Beetle, I think, engine, or maybe it was a Type 2 Transporter's engine, but basically Volkswagen mechanicals. Looks like just kind of an oddball here, but actually the guy who designed this, his name is Brubaker, and he's still around. And when he described his idea behind the design, it was really interesting. He was inspired by, or he wanted to create a car for surfers. It actually has a wooden bumper on it. And he used all kinds of interesting materials and made a really interesting, one-of-a-kind design. And I really do love that they pay respect to it in this book here. 1972 to date, it says. I'm pretty sure that really is 1972 to 73. Really, I don't think many of these were made. Maybe a dozen or so. You'd have to correct me on that in the comments. The 1956 Gordon three-wheeler. This vehicle, and there it says here, built by a subsidiary of Vernon Pools. So is it a company that makes pools, or is it? I know that pools in Britain is often like betting pools. Either a couple of guys who were in the pool business or who were betting on horses decided to build this car, which has an outboard engine that, according to this, drives the right-hand rear wheel only by chain. That's just so tragic. It was basically an open car, according to this, but it actually has a covering on it that I would have to say makes it look a little more substantial. But how awful is that? 1954 to 1958, so they made it for 4 years apparently. But there you have it. Two-stroke, single cylinder, less than 200 cc. Car we all know and love, the Isetta bubble car. This is a 1954 Isetta 236cc coupe. This is the Italian version, the one that was actually designed by ISO. It does explain here that this is the car that actually started the bubble car boom way back in 1953. That's a 1953 car design, and it's the full bubble version, no sliding windows or nothing, just a peeled back roof. This used to be one of my favorite cars to look at when I was a kid. Obviously, they only made the Isetta for a couple of years, and then fortunately, it's in the same part of the alphabet, so the ISO history is right below it, 1962 to date, although ISO has been gone since I think 76, maybe 77. But they made some fantastic cars. Like here's the ISO Grifo GT Coupe, 1960s. The ISO Lele, I love that name. Really neat, rad, mad sports car from the 70s, which was their current vehicle. ISO Rivolta is another, which is like a true four-door supercar way back in the early 70s. But I just had to point out the Isetta in this book. And here's another favorite page of mine in this book. There's two Kaisers. This insane thing, which looks like a Zeppelin. I don't even know what it is, but it looks huge. And this is one thing about this, is that there's no people in the picture, and there's a door handle, but you really can't tell how big or small this car actually is. It probably is tiny, but in this picture, it looks like it's the size of a building. And I always was fascinated by this. It's hideous, but it's fascinating nonetheless. Than the American Kaiser, because there's a gentleman whose name was Kaiser who was in shipbuilding. As you can imagine, he made a killing during the war. And then after the war, he was swimming in cash, so he decided to start his own car company. He spent a lot of money making his vehicles and tried to break into the market way late in 1946, and it didn't work out for him. But he did end up taking over Willie's Jeep, and as a result, Jeep sort of survived. Without him, without Kaiser, they really wouldn't have survived. There's the other Kaiser, the Kaiser Manhattan, which is a great name for a car, I have to say. And then another one of my real favorites of the 1950s, the Capi Chiqui. Yes, Automobiles Capi, Barcelona. The Capi was or Capi, I don't even know how you would say that. It's a three-wheeler powered by a Montesa motorcycle engine, Hispano Villiers. Hispano, so that would be the Spanish Villiers. Gian Giordano is apparently credited with the photograph, so 125cc it has. I never could figure this picture out. It's shown on a street, and in the background there's another mini car that I think is kind of famous, but I've forgotten the name of it right now. You could see by the venting that it has a rear engine. But if you look at the headlights, you can see one of the headlights is actually external, and the other one is faired in with the bodywork. I can't, like from here it looks okay from this angle, but I can't just imagine what that actually would look like from the front. That must look ridiculous. But it's such an unusual car, and I love the way it's like probably red and white here, or red and yellow maybe, since this, Spanish flag colors perhaps. Kleinschnittger is here. Germany would be West Germany, 1950 to 1957, but there's no picture of the Kleinschnittger, but there is a picture of this thing, Klein Wolf, Germany, 1950 to 1951. And this picture is just this guy with this horrible helmet. It looks like it's plastic, and it's 200cc, so that would probably be the 198cc ELO or ILO engine. I don't know if the engine's in the front or the rear. It doesn't say, but yeah, and it's in the winter. One of the tiny early 50s, just right after the war, German microcars. 1957 Moshe 175cc. It's hard to find information on these. I think they started out as an actual pedal car, like an actual literal pedal-powered car. And Moshe was this kind of bicycle, I think his name was Charles Moshe, a French bicycle inventor, mechanic, so to speak. He made pedal cars, and then he added these little tiny engines to them. 100cc, 175cc. It's a little microcar. It's very small. It looks like it's on like a path here. It's not even like a proper road. 1968 Mose. This is a real exotic and amazing American specialty car that was made by this guy whose name was Mose. Madison, Wisconsin. Bruce Mose was his name. These are really something else. It's very hard to find information on them, and hardly any were made. I don't even think it says how many were made here. But it says 1968 to date, so apparently he was still making cars at the time that this book was printed. NSU Prince, or Prince, is how you would in English. 598cc, but that's not a two-stroke, that's a four-stroke rear-engine car. And at the time they were developing the Wankel or Wankel engine. This had the Wankel engine in the front, in front-wheel drive, the Row 80. So these are still around. I actually saw one of these for sale on eBay not long ago, maybe $3 or $4 grand they wanted for it. And it just wasn't my thing, but it wasn't even rusty. They sold them here in the States and all over Western Europe. Really amazing car. But my personal favorite, though, was not so much this. It was always the NSU Fiat Wiensberg. I can't get over this. I never could figure out what it was until recently, that this is actually a German Fiat 500, I think. So the Fiat 500, we all know what those are. Little kind of egg-shaped car, or gumdrop-shaped car maybe. Built in Italy in the millions in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It went over to Germany, and the Germans, they designed their own body style for the Fiat 500. And that's what this is. And I actually have a model of one of these. I'll have to show that at some point. 1963 Peel P50 49cc single-seater coupe. And it's parked just on the side of the street. I've always loved that picture, the way it was just parked on the street. No one has disturbed it, I think, until they saw Jeremy Clarkson drive one of these and walk through the BBC Center with it in 2007, I think. People wouldn't have guessed that this thing weighs like maybe 100 pounds, or could just take it and pick it up and just carry it away. But the owner was able to leave it on the street, and someone has photographed it. I love these little golf cart wheels on it, the side vent. The door is on the opposite side, so it's really neat how you really can't tell how you would get into it from this picture. And Peugeot, their current car in 1973 was the 504, which is a great car, and it's all downhill from there, Peugeot, sorry. Here's another, besides Puma. Another interesting thing you learn from these encyclopedias, this cube right here. 1968 Quasar Unipower. No idea what on earth the meaning of that is. It's more of a statement than anything else. And it's got these, it looks like sliding doors. Really kind of amazing. I really love that. What does it get? It's got an 1100cc. Where'd they put the engine? 1100cc. Where do they fit an engine that large and that? I don't know. It's 6 feet high. Yeah, it looks it. Definitely looks pretty tall. But that'd be really neat to go for a ride in one of those. It looks almost like a Pope mobile, doesn't it? Renault, yeah. Renault's their current car of the day. You have the 1100 saloon. It says Renault 1100, which is actually, I think, a Renault 10, but it doesn't say that here. The current Renault car of the day is this, the 15TS. Does that look very 70s? Here's another page I marked off because it has another one of these Obscuro mobiles, the Rouse. 1949 Rouse 700cc saloon. I gotta say, of all the channels on YouTube, there's only one where you're ever going to get some history on the Rouse or any car like it. Made in France, 1949 to 1950. So probably means they made a handful. It's a light car, obviously. 700cc horizontally opposed, 4-cylinder, 2-stroke engine. That's something else. Front-wheel drive. 2-door saloon is the only model with backwards opening doors. And it looks awful, but you're never going to see that anywhere else. I don't think I've ever seen, because I'm sure if you just type Rouse into the internet, it'd just be somebody's name. You'd just see a bunch of people. I don't think you'd see a picture of this awful car. I'm sure the French want to forget that they even made it. But, there's a Rover. I think another page I've got marked off here. Toyota, yeah. Toyota actually goes back quite a ways. And when you look back in time here, you almost see an American-style car. And this model BA and AA, AA, 1930s and 40s Toyotas look very much American. And then the 1949 Toyota SA, that doesn't really look American, except the front end kind of does. That's kind of like a little bit of Lincoln Town Car, isn't it? But then the rest of it is kind of like that Aero Minor we saw at the earlier part of the catalog. So kind of like a European, almost Volkswagen Beetle body with a Lincoln front end, 4-cylinder engine, which Toyotas often were. Toyota's current offerings in 1973, you have the Publica 800. This is a classic car now that's probably sought after. And then the Toyota Crown was their luxury car. But the Trabant, made by VEB Sachsenring Automobilwerk Zwickau, which we'll get to Zwickau in a second here. But yeah, there's the Trabant Universal. I have a model of one of those too, actually. It's an amazing car. 2-stroke. So is the Will-Am 2-seater. Now here's the car I really like, the Wolseley 1300. And then there's the bigger Wolseley. And I believe in here it'll say Wolseley 1911 to date. So they're still around at the time of the printing of this book, Wolseley. Part of British Leyland. Yes, British Leyland Motor Corporation is credited with the photograph. And when you go into the back of the book, I always liked the Z section, because this is where you get into things that I would never have heard of or never have seen anywhere else. The ZIL, the Russian ZIL limousine, the Russian ZIM limousine, the Russian ZIS limousine. If you're wondering why they're all Russian, in the Russian language, Zavod means works. So being in a communist country, if you set up a factory called, no matter what it was called, Moscow Works, it would have the letter Z in the acronym somewhere. So Z often shows up in automobile company names in Russia because it means works, basically. So that's why they kind of dominate the Z section. But then there's two real interesting vehicles here. The Zundap Janus, which has a front opening door like the Isetta, very similar to the Isetta, except the rear door also opens. I nearly bought a model of one of these in 1/18 scale, but the reason I didn't buy it is because the doors didn't open. Like, why would you want a model of a car that is famous for the front and rear of the car opening if the doors don't open on that model? So I didn't buy it. But this is the one I really, really love, the Zunder, 1960 Zunder. And I just love the color. It's just such an odd looking but neat looking car. And there's not much about it here. 200 were made. Zunder in Argentina. But yeah, we're at the back of the book now. And the very, very last entry in this book is this car right here, the Zwickau P70, also made by VEB Automobilwerks Zwickau, which is the East German auto proprietor, the same people who made the Trabant. This is the car that predated the Trabant, 1956 to 1959. 25,000 of these were made, so it'll be plastic, this vehicle. And again, it's got the same type of almost like red and white color scheme as this car here. It's kind of like a Z, almost very much like a Z shape in the Z section of the book before you come to a glossary. Yeah, that's pretty much it before you get to the index, where it probably just has, it's just some personality names and probably some additional photo credits and things like that. How far did we go, though? We went all the way to the end, which was page 738. What page did it start? It's page 60 or so? So yeah, 700 pages of automotive history. This is the book that I learned about cars from. But there's a lot of things that I discovered. Some of them weird nonsense like this that, you'll never see anywhere else. And some of it just looking back in time at famous companies like Volvo. This is a really great book. If you can get your hands on a copy of one of these, it's probably not expensive today. You probably get it for below the actual price it was when it was in print, which was $30. You could probably get one today for less than that on eBay or something or other. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed taking a look at this book with me and coming down a trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. Consider subscribing. I'm fairly new to YouTube. I'd love to do more videos like this, so consider, a like and a subscribe. At the very least, a like. It'd give me a little bit of support. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end if you have, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.